Hello and welcome. You're with IndiaPostLive.com, India's first live conversation web television. Well, it had seemed to the people of both India and Sri Lanka when Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapakse attended the swearing-in ceremony of new Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the 26th of May that a new era was dawning as far as the relations between the two countries were concerned. But it seems that the honeymoon ended even before it began. Let's take a look.
It was amid fears that the Modi government will not be favourable for the Rajapaksa administration in Sri Lanka that the two leaders met in New Delhi on the 26th of May. Ahead of the bilateral talks, Rajapaksa, in what was seen as a friendly gesture, had released all Indian fishermen jailed in Sri Lanka. However, what was termed as smooth talks didn't seem so days after the meeting. Sri Lanka was back at it. On the 31st of May, 29 Indian fishermen were arrested and detained in Sri Lanka, and even before the international community could begin speculating what must have happened at the bilateral talks, Rajapaksa ordered the release of all 29 fishermen. So what exactly happened at the talks? Are the India-Sri Lanka dialogues headed south?
All right, so of course the 29 Indian fishermen have been released, but the relations between India and Sri Lanka are not limited to arrests and releases of fishermen. And to talk about the nuances of the relationships between the two countries, I have with me in the studio Lakshmi Krishna Kumar. Lakshmi is the deputy editor with India Post Live. Lakshmi, thanks so much for joining us. Online, I have Mr. Radhakrishnan. Mr. Radhakrishnan is senior editor with The Frontline and an expert on the subject. Sir, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I welcome you to the conversation. I also have political analyst who is joining us from Bangalore, Veera Raghav. Veera Raghav, thank you so much for joining the conversation. Radhakrishnan, I also have with me on the phone line from Chennai another very senior journalist who knows the Sri Lankan issue and the Indo-Sri Lanka ties, Rajesh Sundaram. Rajesh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, this is Nilanjana and we have Lakshmi Krishna Kumar in the studio, and we also have Radhakrishnan sir and Veera Raghav joining us online. Thank you so much for joining us, Rajesh. All right, let me first go across to Mr. Radhakrishnan. Sir, if you can hear me, we seem to have a very unwilling Sri Lankan president. In fact, the ties between India and Sri Lanka seem to go sour. The relations seem to go sour after his visit to India in 2010, when no progress was made as far as the 13th Amendment was concerned. Where do you see relations heading now that Narendra Modi is in power?
See, I would say that relations are not headed anywhere southwards. Relationship is vibrant and well at this point in time. I would say that Mr. Modi is extremely lucky because Government of India, for whatever reasons, decided to not vote with the United States at Geneva at the United Nations resolution, human rights resolution. Consequent to that, there has been this huge surge of goodwill in Colombo, because Colombo at that point of time had expected that India will not support Sri Lanka. It will, vote with the UN, with the US resolution on the issue. And given the fact that that was not done, that came as a huge relief for Colombo. Actually, if you go back in time and look at any of those actions that India has done, it is more hurt that has come out on the part of Sri Lanka. And they don't look at issues on the merit as to, in fact, the former NSA, Mr. Shivshankar Menon, did explain to us at one point of time that India had to vote against Sri Lanka in 2010 and later on, because Sri Lanka had given us a series of promises and did not abide by those promises at all, and then hence India did not have a choice but to send a stern message across to Sri Lanka. But from the Sri Lankan side, what I've heard for all these years, with the sense of hurt, look, a lot of these things have been sorted out bilaterally, including the 13th Amendment. Is not a product of any, universal, universal agreement or anything. It's a agreement that Rajiv Gandhi basically gave to Sri Lanka, and Sri Lankan Parliament adopted it.
Yes.
And a lot of these Tamil issues have always been handled bilaterally, and there is no issue that has gone to an international forum. And that is the hurt that Sri Lanka feels, and that has been set right, rightly or wrongly, in Manmohan Singh's last few months, and that has actually set the stage for Modi Rajapaksa May.
All right. Having said that, Rajesh, can I just talk to you and then I'll go across to Lakshmi. Rajesh, after the meeting, External Affairs Secretary Sujata Singh said in a press conference that Narendra Modi insisted that, Sri Lanka does a natural reconciliation so that the Tamil community can live in peace and harmony in Sri Lanka. That seemed to have caused an embarrassment for the Rajapaksa government. What are your comments?
Well, if you see the 13th Amendment, any talk of that is really a dishonest attempt, because as far as the 13th Amendment is concerned, it's already been thrown out of the window by the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka. So any solution, any resolution that's based on that is just not in the realm of possibility. If you look at is there a will, is there a political will in Sri Lanka for any settlement, be it 13th Amendment or otherwise? I don't think so. If you ask the Tamil Alliance, which is the parliamentary grouping of Tamil parties, they have been frustrated because not an inch has been ceded to them. What they've got as a provincial council, which does not even have powers of what a municipality would have in India. So there have been no real or legitimate or credible steps that have been taken by the Rajapaksa regime in the last 4 years. Ever since the end of the war, 5 years, they've not taken any steps which would be seen as reconciliatory or which would have been seen as being, devolving the powers to the Tamil population or meeting the legitimate political aspirations. So all of these talks will have to really be redrawn. The Indian foreign policy on Sri Lanka has been working on a particular template for the past 10 years. That template should be broken and there has to be a relook. There has to be, positive steps taken towards, meeting the aspirations of Tamil people. You have a situation in the Tamil majority areas where the basic fundamental rights are denied to the people, where they cannot even, grieve the people who were killed in the genocide. There is no recognition of the fact that there were 40,000 Tamil civilians who died. There is no agreement for an international investigation. So India will have to look at a whole gamut of things afresh and break away really from the UPA Sri Lanka policy, and only then can we take a step forward. And all this talk about the Amendment 13 and whatever remnants we have from the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord are not really an honest attempt. They are not a sincere attempt going ahead.
All right. All right. Thanks, Rajesh. Let me go across to Lakshmi now. Lakshmi, what Rajesh said, that India has to look at a whole gamut of things and start a lot of issues from scratch, really. But also, Sri Lanka has been repeatedly evasive on India's call for a political solution for a power sharing agreement.
Yes, exactly. That's what we saw right now, to do with the fishermen being released just before the day Modi was taking that oath. And then you go on to see that he goes away, and then 29 fishermen, they are arrested and then they are let off. But what is it exactly? What must have been the talks? Why sudden change of mind? What happened? Rajesh, if you could just tell us, if you could throw light on what, if we could just speculate and see what must have happened there. Just if you can tell us, what must have translated into these, what dialogue would
besides what Sujata Singh told us, you mean, the inside story.
Like there is a little more than,
Okay.
If we were to
Rajesh?
Well, I think there are two tracks here. One is the track that the Foreign Office is taking, which clearly is in divergence with the resolutions that have been passed in Tamil Nadu. Now, going ahead, Jayalalitha and the ADMK and the parties in Tamil Nadu are a significant force, and the government cannot really deny, or refuse to listen to the voice that is coming from Tamil Nadu. There has been a unanimous passed resolution which seeks sanctions on Sri Lanka, which seeks the issues related to Kachadivu, the fishermen, all of which were ignored by the Manmohan Singh government. Jayalalitha wrote dozens of letters to the UPA government. The Prime Minister chose to ignore them. I think there is a calibrated approach now to listen to what they're saying, because if you look at it, it's 10% of population that these elected representatives represent collectively, and that's what these that's where the strength of these resolutions comes from. The UPA chose to ignore it. They faced the the political consequences in the elections. Right now, we have a new government, and clearly, they have to break the templates that have been created over the last 10 years for the foreign ministry to follow. And if the new prime minister is willing to listen, that's something that the Sri Lankans definitely wouldn't like. So there are a whole lot of these interlinked issues here, right from the killing of 40,000 civilians, Tamil civilians by Sri Lankan army, the fact that it's not investigated, right down to the issues of Kachativu, of the fishermen. All of these need to be looked at in a different light altogether. And in this, the voices that are coming from Tamil Nadu need to be heard. The voices of the elected representatives, unanimous voices, need to be heard. And I think you can say that it's a central subject, foreign policy is a central subject. But here, there has to be a calibrated change in India's foreign policy, where, when there are sane voices coming from states, they need to be incorporated into the foreign policy. And there have to be changes in the Sri Lanka policy, and those changes will have to be in tune with what the people in Tamil Nadu are saying, or the elected representatives of the people of Tamil Nadu are saying.
All right. Thanks, Rajesh. Let me go across now to Veera Raghav. Veera Raghav joins us from Bangalore. Veera Raghav, if you can hear me, you have just heard what Radhakrishnan sir and Rajesh said, and even Lakshmi pointed out. But this issue that Rajesh just said, that there has to be a relook of India's policy on Sri Lanka. Jayalalitha has been consistently writing letters to the UPA government, as Rajesh pointed out. Even after this issue of the arrest of the fishermen, again she shot a letter to Narendra Modi. Where do you see Jayalalitha playing a role in the bilateral ties between India and Sri Lanka? After this, we will of course move on to the larger issue. But let's just take a look at the politics down south. What is Jayalalitha's role in this entire matter?
I couldn't hear what Rajesh was saying.
All right.
But I think the debate and the entire discussion has been at a very superficial level. I think you need to ask yourself the question on whether you would allow Omar Abdullah's point of view to dictate India's foreign policy vis-a-vis Pakistan. You wouldn't. It's very careless to believe that political sentiment in a state like Tamil Nadu should impact diplomatic relations between India and Sri Lanka.
Absolutely.
And frankly, I don't think we've done I don't think some of the questions reflect due research that needs to have been done in terms of the fact that Indo-Sri Lanka relations in a geostrategic level has gone on despite political pressure from Tamil Nadu.
Right.
Yes, Jayalalitha can write statements, and that is purely at a very, for her own political need in Tamil Nadu in terms of sending out the message of emerging as a champion of the Tamil cause.
That worked for her, yes.
As far as the largest interest is concerned, and let's not forget, before we write off and say that there is a change of heart between Rajapaksa and Narendra Modi, I think too much was made out of the fact that Rajapaksa was invited. He was invited as part of the SAARC response. It was not a diplomatic statement. Pakistan Prime Minister was there as well. And all SAARC leaders were there for Narendra Modi's rally. We make too much out of it, and then we make too much out of what happens next as well. There are serious issues as far as India and Sri Lanka is concerned. And serious issues are at a very geostrategic level. The two countries have been working on beneath the facade that we are talking about. But India has expressed its position very clearly on this matter. As far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, there was pressure in the last government because the DMK was an ally.
Yes.
And it was a coalition government. But expect now New Delhi to have its own direct relation with Colombo, because this plays out in the larger geopolitical context of the world, where you have to look at the US, you have to look at China, you have to look at Sri Lanka, and you have to look at India.
Right. Thank you, Veera Raghav. Thank you for bringing that into perspective. I was, like I said, I was, just about to embark on the larger picture. Can I ask Radhakrishnan sir this question? India has also been consistently uncomfortable and hostile about Sri Lanka's proximity to China. Economic ties, military ties. Where do you see that headed now?
See, unfortunately for Sri Lanka, whether it wishes it away or not, India happens to be 50 nautical miles away, and there is some kind of an umbilical cord in the form of the string of islands that connect the southern tip of India to the northern tip of Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Having said that, I have to also say that China is a few million miles away from Sri Lanka, and for all practical purposes. In fact, the former High Commissioner, Indian High Commissioner in Sri Lanka, who is now in China, used to tell this very frequently, that the ties between India and Sri Lanka are civilizational, are people to people, and the people of India and Sri Lanka relate to each other in a way that no other country possibly can, and that especially with the southern part of Sri Lanka, southern part of India, this Tamil Nadu, Kerala and all that. These ties are historic, and given the fact that India is the largest Buddhist center for any Buddhist in the world, and given the fact that majority of the Sinhalese are Buddhists, India's the umbilical link will always be there at all levels, at a spiritual level, at a commercial level, because
Yes.
it's impossible to, carry, say for instance, onions or, potatoes from, or rice, for that matter, from China all the way to Sri Lanka. If the costs just don't work out. So, essentially, the India-Sri Lanka equation is beyond political causes. Two landmasses are essentially linked with each other. And that is why, as Veeraraghav rightly pointed out, our strategic interests also lie within with Sri Lanka being with us and Sri Lanka being a friendly neighbor. Having said that, I have to also add that there has been no significant change in either Sri Lankan policy or Indian policy towards one another. Now, I say that with a fair amount of conviction, because it is natural for countries to reach out to donors. China has been one of the largest donors in Africa. Nothing wrong in Sri Lanka trying to get some money or grants and donations and getting some infrastructure projects going in Sri Lanka. You have to remember that India has a system which is far complicated than a Chinese system, which basically is like you pitch for a project and the project takes about 6 months to 1 year to be approved in New Delhi. And they don't understand the compulsions of Colombo. Colombo wanted to do reconstruction in the north like yesterday. They wanted to show development in lieu of political power being granted to the Tamils because of certain circumstances in Sri Lanka. Now, given all these compulsions, Sri Lanka turned towards China. And also, there was also a lot of other small factors that played a part. I emphasize on the part that these are small factors. And I do not see a need for changing Indian policy towards Sri Lanka. It at best needs some tweaking, but we are on the right path. We have to emphasize on a political solution based on the 13th Amendment to us, and that is exactly what Prime Minister Modi has done. And Rajapaksa has taken that sentiment very well, and he has taken the message home. It has been conveyed in all forums possible through Prime Ministers, through NSAs, and every single forum. There has been no Indian change in policy. I don't think a change in policy is required, and I don't see Sri Lanka moving out of the Indian ambit and or sphere of influence because it's simply not possible.
All right. Lakshmi, let me go across to you now. The fact that India abstained from voting on the human rights issue in Geneva. Now, in 2009, when the war was going on in which the LTTE was ultimately, destroyed, if I may use the word, both Washington and New Delhi, both of them supported Sri Lanka in that. However, US has been pressurizing India to vote in the human rights issue in Geneva, but India abstained. And that US has been doing that, obviously, so that the ties between Sri Lanka and China, get severed. Right. So how do you see that play? Do you think India did the right thing? Of course, Radhakrishnan sir and Veeraraghav and Rajesh pointed out that India realizes that we are too close to Sri Lanka to really take a very strong stand.
It is very difficult. India has to play safe, and some ways India is sitting on the fence when it comes to the human rights issues, because you can't ignore the fact it was a genocide, and the way India is dealt with it, and even if we were to say that the way Jayalalitha is treating it or politicizing it and whatever, there is a cry out there through political or whatever, there is a representation situation, you know. And whether you see it political or otherwise, I think it is a necessary evil, you know, because there is human rights issues there, and you know, India should, if you were to take a stand, you know, that should not be ignored.
But you know, what's interesting is that the ties had become sour.
Yes.
And despite that, Dr. Manmohan Singh chose to abstain. So that actually came as a surprise to many. But as Radhakrishnan sir pointed out, it should not. Because ultimately there is so much that ties the two countries together.
There is a lot between, I mean, that India and Sri Lanka share, you know, a lot of commonalities and all of that. So India cannot, you know, at the moment take a stand, and you know, Modi having invited Rajapakse, and this present, you know, it is something that we'll have to, you know, look at what is it exactly, you know, what is it going to be, because what we have seen is again funny, that you know, release of the fishermen, then again them being you know, detained.
So there's a thin line, you're saying that
there is something which is not clear, you know. If everything went well, if the talks were as smooth, then what was it exactly? What exactly?
Rajesh Sundaram is still on the phone line with us from Chennai. Rajesh, you know, thank you so much. You could come on the phone to talk to us. Can I have your last comments on whatever we have discussed so far before we let you go?
There has to be a principled diplomacy, in the sense that if we have to call a genocide, we cannot allow a small regime which is accused of genocide, which is accused of repressing its journalists, which is accused of repressing the civil society, to get away with all of that. You know, we are saying that because they are playing the China card or the Pakistan card, we call it, you know, we have some vague sense of geopolitics, and we say that no, you know, we will support this regime. It's wrong. We have to have, you know, the time has come that after 10 years of the UPA government, the new government should look at it afresh. They should break the old templates. They should have principled diplomacy. They should call a genocide, and they should take this regime on in a big way, you know, because Indo-Sri Lanka relations can go on as they will, but not with the kind of repressive regime that you have there, which is not only denying basic rights to the Tamils, but to the largest Sinhala population as well. They are a threat to the free judiciary there, the kind of action that they've taken against the Supreme Court judge. All of those things need to be taken into account. You know, you cannot legitimize a regime which cannot be legitimized, which is accused of genocide, which is repressing its own people.
Right.
So, you know, all the talk of geopolitics and, you know, China is going to take control if we don't go there is all wrong. We have to have a principled diplomacy, and then we have to have our influence, you know. Even the Sinhalese would respect us more, the population, if we take a principled stance in this regard, you know.
All
When
right.
we say that all human rights there should be respected, all fundamental rights should be given by that regime. I don't think there should be anything wrong. In the Chinese cannot win the hearts and minds of the people. The Indians are there, you know. So the principal diplomacy should come before any strategic thinking here.
All right.
Rajesh, we have to call a spade a spade.
Okay, we have to call a spade a spade. Veera Raghav, let me go across to you again. A principled stand needs to be taken by India. We need to call a genocide is what both Rajesh Sundaram and Lakshmi Krishna Kumar are saying. Your final comments.
Oh, absolutely. As far as the humanitarian aspect is concerned, I don't think anyone can dispute that. But whether that translates into a diplomatic stand, would you agree if somebody else comes and says Kashmir is a genocide by the Indian Army? Would you agree for Western or the Northeast? So please don't forget that India in the international community, India has also 7 skeletons in its cupboard, and it cannot take a stand which is irrational and stupid and driven by journalism and the needs of journalists to claim to be torchbearers of democracy. Diplomacy and international relations is a very different concept to studio discussions. So, while you and I can call it a genocide, and we must, in due ethics of journalism, all of us have gone through and seen what is there. India must build pressure, but remember, the only thing that works in the interest of the Sri Lankan Tamils is for India to actually engage with Sri Lanka and not take an aggressive stand by which you lose whatever leverage you have over Colombo to ensure that the remaining Tamils in Sri Lanka have a better life. Visheshwaran, who's there in the northern provinces, elected by the people, had requested Mr. Manmohan Singh to come down to Jaffna. When the entire political protest in Tamil Nadu ensured that the Prime Minister did not go to Colombo for the Chogom meeting. So let's not forget that that kind of aggressive positioning for domestic political reasons only goes against the interest of the Sri Lankan Tamil people who are back there, who are trying to rebuild their lives.
All right, Lakshmi, do you agree with what Veera Raghav has said?
He's talked about, the studio discussions and all of that. But yes, when it comes to taking a stand, India did not do the right thing is what I would say. That is a personal view. That's not a diplomatic view. And of course, the country...
As a journalist, you're saying that
it's more...
the genocide did happen. So.
Yes, it did happen. And, it does not, it put us in the right light when we cannot take a stand, So...
Okay, well, yes. that debate, of course, will continue on the website with your audio and video comments. Veera Raghav, Lakshmi, please, continue this conversation with your audio and video comments. Of course, this will also be out there. Let me get Radhakrishnan sir's last comments on what we just discussed. The debate is getting slightly hot. Rajesh and Lakshmi are very strongly of the view that we must call a spade, we must call a genocide. Veera Raghav is saying that one has to look at the larger picture, and journalists pontificating in the studio is not the same thing as diplomatic ties out there on the ground. So,
absolutely, I would tend to agree with Veera Raghav for obvious reasons. One is that at a personal level, you can be guided by your emotions. When you speak about a country, you need to look at issues more holistically. While we support an investigation into the mass killings, we need to also not lose track of the fact that there are a lot of people living there, which is exactly the point that Veera Raghav made.
Yes.
The UN did estimate about 40,000 killings in the final phases of the war, and we should also remember that a lot of those killings were because of the Sri Lankan army shelling positions in the rebel-held areas. And also, this is also very important to note that the LTT did not let people travel into the government safe zones. I would suggest that people, before they come into studios and sit and pontificate on genocide, should also visit Sri Lanka and talk to people there and listen to what people say. Of course, if you go as a tourist and spend a day and a half there, obviously there will not be people who are willing to talk to you. But if you have if you take the effort, there are a lot of people who are willing to come out and say that the LTT actually is responsible for a majority of those killings. Because of that, I wouldn't condone what the Sri Lankan army did. They basically shelled their way through. They just did not leave anything standing on their way, even a grass or even a blade of grass on their way. But the point is that while investigations into that go on, as a country, we need to be focused on the living people. If we are not going to focus on the 300,000 living, their safety, their life is in danger at this point of time, their political aspirations, whatever they need to achieve in this short span of time, has there has been some development. You see, I mean, there has been an election in that phase. Give the guy some credit. He has actually that the northern province is the only province being ruled by anybody but the Tamil National Alliance. There is no opposition to Rajapaksa in Sri Lanka. All the 8 other provinces are held by Rajapaksa's coalition, UPFA, and this has to be remembered. The only opposition is in the north. Any progress will be incremental.
Yes.
You can't simply say that because Tamil Nadu is a federal state or because...
Lakshmi has a point to make, sir.
It's not that, we don't refute that the LTT was on the wrong side at all.
I hope you give me that respect.
Okay, all right.
The point is that the Sri Lankan constitution has not really implemented the 13th Amendment. We should be progressing on those lines, and we should be trying to make life of those who are living comfortable than talking about the dead people. You talk about dead people from a justice point of view, a closure point, that can take, and there is no time frame to bring anybody to justice. We have seen that enough and more examples from Nazi time onwards, from incidents in South Africa, in other parts of Africa, including Niger and other places. So my point happens to be that think of the living and not of the dead at this point of time.
All right, all right. Think of the living and not of the dead. It seems as if for India it is having to do a lot of balancing act in terms of the bilateral ties with Sri Lanka. On one hand, it abstained from the vote. On the other hand, it is calling the genocide. But obviously, when it comes to these two ties, Lakshmi, India has no choice. India has to look at the larger picture, right?
India, of course, has to look at the larger picture. There's no denying that. There is no denying that there are still people out there we have to, India has to keep in mind.
Yes.
But, there is no refuting of the fact that, LTTE was, also not completely in the right. They were in the wrong as well. But when the Sri Lankan government took us, okay, they were completely in the wrong. They were completely in the wrong, if that's what you're saying. But again, killing in, genocide was a genocide, and that has to be accepted. That is one thing that India has to take a stand and accept that.
All right. So this debate, Mr. Radhakrishnan and Lakshmi and Rajesh, who joined us on the phone line, we have to wrap up the conversation right now in the studio. But this conversation will definitely continue on www.indiapostlive.com. And Veera Raghav, thank you so much for joining us. And Radhakrishnan sir, thank you so much for your insights. And of course, Lakshmi and Rajesh, who joined us on the phone line. Thank you so much. I think it became a slightly heated debate, and the debate will definitely go on through your audio comments, your video comments, your posts and your tweets at hashtag #IndiaPostLive and @IndiaPostLive. Thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye.